Well, welcome back, everyone. I just wanted to start off by saying even if you didn't get the quiz and lab in on time, please still do those because a late grade is better than no grade at all. And I did adjust the due dates on like the Chapter 2 quiz because of issues with Canvas. So all of that is due this Sunday night, 11:59 p.m., so we can go over it on Monday morning. And on the lab, you can still submit it late, even though that that box has said, oh, it'll tell you you're submitting it late, but we'll still grade it. Anyway,
can I jump in with one quick thing?
Yes, please do.
For those of you online students, I know it's early, but please email me to let me know where you're going to be taking your test so I can make sure that they get the passwords and all that kind of stuff that are needed for you to take the test. So please let me know, potentially as early as this week. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, and also for our online students, it is an online, kind of section of the class, but you still have to keep up with the timeline. So just try to pay attention to those dates. I try to give adequate time. If you have any issues with it, just let me know. I'm flexible. Anyway, let's get back into finishing up our Chapter 3 here, our plants and people part of the chapter. So everybody got my screen there?
We'll have it here in just a couple seconds.
All right.
All right.
So we left off, and sorry, I'm going to have to scroll through this. I meant to divide this into two, but I kind of forgot to there. I did want to kind of come back to one part that I kind of glossed over here when we're talking about nutritional needs of humans. Historically, we look at this this whole issue here with the complementary amino acids, methionine and lysine, and how they complement each other to create a whole group of amino acids in order to provide all of the amino acids that we need to create the proteins that we need for our bodies to function. So on that amino acid deal there, the way we've traditionally done it around the world, every agricultural civilization has had a grain and legume combination. So we look at, for instance, in India, in Asia, their grain is rice. In India, their legume is lentils. And other parts of Asia, they use soybeans. So that kind of pairing happens throughout the world with these agricultural civilizations that arise. And it all kind of started with the plant part of the diet. Of course, meat has always been an important part of a human diet as well, but all of the agricultural civilizations had some sort of grain and legume combination in their diets, which I think is kind of interesting. You look at the Americas, we had corn and different types of beans, depending on where you're at. You look at the Mediterranean areas, they had barley and some other grains, in some places wheat, and they combine that with things like fava beans. So all of these cultures, their foods kind of, start to revolve around this issue. And at the time, they had no idea what amino acids were, but they, grew them complementary to each other ecologically as well. So it tends to be that most of the grains need a lot of nitrogen in order to grow well. And it just so happens that legumes provide a little bit of extra nitrogen for the grains. So it's a really unique combination that is important to civilization altogether. And scientifically now we see that there's this evidence of the complementary amino acids. All right, so pardon me while I click through a bunch of stuff trying to get ahead back to where we left off. And also talking about the nutrition front, that's kind of historically changed as well, right? So, see, I put something in here about a little addition for us. Sorry for all the clicking here. We left off talking about the medicines and how until the last century, most medicines were actually derived directly from plants. And one example of a modern day medicine that its roots go back to the Native Americans' use of willow trees, not just willow, but it's also in other types of populus, which are in the same family as willows, aspen trees, cottonwoods. They all have this salicylic acid found in the bark of the trees, which is a painkiller. So today, we synthesize salicylic acid into aspirin. But we could found that modern day medicine being used traditionally in Native American cultures. All kinds of examples out there of our medicines. And I like to say that in terms of, the usage of medicine, it's all about the difference in dose, right? That creates turns a medicine into a poison. So even our modern painkillers, the opiates that we're having kind of this, crisis in our country around, they were originally based on plants. The poppy is where they originally derived opium. Later on, they started synthesizing that chemical into all the different opiates, including, morphine, hydrocodone that is in a lot of the pharmaceuticals that cause the abuse. It's a very addictive substance. So there's a problem with that. But again, you use a little bit of it, it's a medicine. You use a lot of it or abuse it, it becomes a poison. So it's really the same with any substance, I think. So we'll talk about that again when we go to the plant pest management part of the book. When we get into that, we're talking about how using a pesticide, a little bit of it can work very well and be like a medicine for the plant. Using a lot of it can also be poisonous, right? So moving on, talking about the, other aspects of plant products. So we tend to use, plants for food, for fiber, for fuel, but we also use them just for pleasure and recreational use. And in some cases, we're not getting any benefits other than maybe some psychological benefits. Some of them are even harmful to our health, like tobacco, for instance. Not saying you shouldn't grow tobacco. It's a very important cash crop. But as we know, it's very harmful to your health, right? So alcohol, same way. And the issues here too, I would say that in some cases, some doctors say that alcohol is good for you in moderation, but in large doses, of course, a toxin, a poison. But those can be very profitable ways of using the land. In tropical countries, a lot of these underdeveloped countries grow things like coffee or tea for export rather than producing staple food crops, because they don't get much for growing these staple food crops and selling them, in their local markets. But if they grow and export things like coffee and tea, they can get a fair amount of money and actually make a decent living. Now we talk about sugar cane as well, and sugar beet in the temperate areas. If we were to look at the food pyramid, right, sugar is at the top of the food pyramid. We want to use it sparingly in our diet. So we think of this, again, on a large level as kind of being bad for us, causing obesity, for instance. However, they're profitable crops to grow, more profitable than the staple foods. So it makes sense to grow them and sell them, especially considering how, we're operating on the margins often. Also, looking at corn, for instance, about 8% of the U.S. corn crop is actually used to create sweeteners, corn syrup, and of course, high fructose corn syrup, which finds its way in pretty much any processed food. There's also this interesting just kind of affinity that people have for plants and animals and just nature. And we kind of co-evolved with plants and animals, which influences our physiology, our psychology, our sociology. And E.O. Wilson actually wrote about this, and he coined the term biophilia, where we still retain that affinity for plants and animals, even though we might not need them. Pictured here, we have things like house cats, right? We have dogs, that aren't necessarily used for what they were initially bred for anyway, for hunting, but we just have them as pets to improve our psychology. We're also in this image, bringing flowers into our homes as a table decoration, just to improve our sense of well-being. That's what the whole biophilia thing is about. So that is actually one of the most persistent expressions of biophilia, our desire for cut flowers and potted plants indoor. And I would also say, though, that even though there's that aspect of it, they can perform a function, especially the potted plants in homes. They can actually work to help clean indoor air. So biophilia is not only, just psychological, it can also be practical. In a lot of areas, though, these plants, these potted plants, and sometimes the cut flowers, especially in our cool temperate regions, tend to be produced in greenhouses. A lot of our houseplants are tropical of origin, so we grow them indoors, which means that there's a lot of energy input into their growth, and makes them a higher value crop too, more of a horticultural crop. So we also get to the point where we start importing these things as well. And that import, of course, causes some other issues.
Please.
Uh-oh.
In a few minutes, we will have a fire drill. Please proceed to your designated safe areas during the drill. Please do not report back into the building until the all clear is given over the PA system. I repeat, in a few minutes, we will have a fire drill. Please proceed to your designated safe areas during the drill. Please do not report back into the building until the all clear is given over the PA system.
Hey, good to know. Sorry for the interruption there.
Yeah, which reminds me, do you want to pause for a few minutes while we have our drill, or you want to just keep going and I can mute our microphone?
Yeah, I guess let's just keep going. Well, by a few minutes, what do they mean there, Tom?
Usually it's 5.
Okay, so yeah, actually probably be better to pause. Huh?
Okay. I'll pause and I'll mute our microphone for y'all anyway, so y'all don't have to hear it.
Yeah, all right.
Okay. But it's supposed to be at 10 o'clock, so it should be on the nose.
All righty. So our another big thing for our biophilia is our use of ornamental plants in landscaping, which is, it's a very big industry, right? And we tend to use plants from all around the world in that type of landscaping, which in some cases creates a downside of this, kind of human-made diversity, that we've incidentally introduced a lot of ornamental plants that have escaped and become weeds, invasive plants displacing our native species, becoming a big problem. Also, the EPA states that we're using more pesticides and herbicides applied to these ornamentals, especially when we look at things like lawns. Lawns technically are actually the largest irrigated crop in the U.S. Say we have over 50 million acres of turf grass that is irrigated. in the United States. Isn't that kind of crazy to think about? It's not an agronomic crop, but it's still very important. So where do we grow these plants? We have specialized farms, nurseries, greenhouses, and sod farms to provide these plants, especially for urban and suburban environments. So still a very important part of agriculture. The ornamental crops, interestingly enough, actually count as the most labor-intensive crops in the country. Nearly 20%, 1/5 of U.S. agricultural labor costs is in these plants. But they provide a lot of jobs for many people, so they can be a good thing too. And as I mentioned, they can be more intensive for the use of fertilizers, pesticides than traditional agriculture. And a lot of these industries, greenhouses and nursery industries, are now having to practice water and fertilizer recycling and use kind of lower impact methods of pest control when possible, just because it is so high impact. So that stuff's actually becoming more sustainable. So a lot of these crops can actually have uses too. So in some cases, they can be used in our diets. They can be materials for manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, etc. So they also play a very important role in local and regional economies other than just being ornamental plants. All right, so that finishes our chapter 3 there. Does anybody have any questions about chapter 3? Plants and humans, it's fairly straightforward, but it's good to get that kind of context of why and how we use plants. So I'm going to actually spend the rest of our time discussing our crop project assignments, which is kind of we'll have the crop project kind of due at the midterm for this semester. So you got a while to finish this crop project. And then we'll have another aspect of it that will be kind of due at the end of the semester. So we're going to get into that in just a moment. I'm thinking, Tom, if you guys want to just go ahead and pause in anticipation of our fire alarm.
It just started beeping, so.
All right, good deal.
Okay.
All righty.
All right, we're live.
So talking about our crop project, this is a pretty big assignment, and basically the issue here is that we don't have enough time to really get into the chapters of the book that are focusing on the crops. And let's see, I think that's 17 through 25. So be looking at those chapters and looking through, use those kind of as a basis for what crop you want to select. And I put us a module on Canvas to kind of work on this crop project. And I'm just going to go over a little presentation of kind of what I want you to do for the project here. So let's see if I can share my screen with you again. All right, so, and there's a copy of this presentation online as well on in that module, or there should be anyway. So first, select your crop, right? So think about what kind of crop that you want to do, and whatever you're interested in. It could be a forage crop, it could be a fiber crop, a fuel crop, it could be a medicinal crop, a row crop, whatever you want to do. Pick your crop first, and there's actually a forum, a little discussion board on that module in Canvas that I want you to go in there, and as soon as you figure out what crop you want to do, put it in there along with the scientific name of the crop. So your only requirement here is it's got to be a plant. And really, you want to select something that you don't want to do like a really obscure crop that you're not going to find enough information on. So after you've figured out what your crop is, signed up for it, start doing some research. So I want you to actually cite a minimum of, say, 5 sources. And one of those should be a book source. 2 or 3 of those should be peer-reviewed articles. One of them could be a grower interview, or it could be another multimedia, like a video, YouTube video, whatever. As long as it's, you know, semi-professional, it could be a podcast, news article, and then, I mean, anything else that you want to use. But we want to make sure that we have some good professional, well-researched documentation of what you're working on here. And here we've got a link to Southside's Learning Resource Center, their library. You can use that quick search in there as a way to find those peer-reviewed articles. And the VCCS has gotten a lot, the community college system has gotten a lot better in providing more collections of articles, journal articles. And when you search, it should say on the right side whether it's a peer-reviewed article or a book source. You can use ebooks for your book source, or you can, you know, go through the library and find you a good physical book. Whatever you want to do there, just make sure you have at least 5 sources of this criteria. And what are you looking for? So first, we want to do kind of a journalistic approach. And this, you're going to make a 5 to 10 page report for this project, and then you're going to make a multimedia presentation. But first comes the report. So let's concentrate on the report right now. It's by 5 to 10 pages. I'm not talking about paragraphs. We don't want this in like essay form. We want it in an easily readable kind of fact sheet format. And I'm going to post an example for you guys. However, I want you guys to pick out your crops first, because I don't want to, you know, choose one of the crops that you guys want to cover. So in the basic crop information, we're looking at the crop's taxonomy. So what is the common name of the plant, or common names? Like corn, right? Also has the common name maize. What is the scientific name? Zea mays for corn. And we would include the family there, that taxonomic relationship. So the family for corn is the Poaceae family, the grain family. What are the common varieties? And this is where we can get general or specific. It's up to you guys. If you know, we could have multiple people do a project on corn, for instance, have someone focusing on like feed corn, whereas someone else is focusing more on sweet corn. They're the same plant, same species, but they're entirely different production systems involved with them. So once you have the specific, we're looking at the common varieties. So for like feed corn, for instance, we get like a, you know, a combination of letters and numbers. But for our sweet corn, we often have these lovely names like Serendipity, one of my favorite sweet corns, or Peaches and Cream. So anyway, that's kind of the taxonomic part of it. The next part is, you know, where did it come from? Where was it domesticated? What is its center of origin? Its center of domestication, its center of diversity. This, you know, one slide, what we're talking about on a report is just a few lines, really. The different types. So is there field corn? Is there sweet corn? Amongst your sweet corn, for instance, there are different types of sweet corn. We have the regular sugary type. We have the super sugary type, the shrunken type. So what are we looking for there in terms of the different types? Of course, what are the uses of the crop? So how do you actually make use of the crop itself? Is it used for fresh eating, like most sweet corn, or is it used for processing, like for canned corn? Do we process it into feed to feed to animals? You know, what are the uses of it? Are there some obscure uses? Some medicinal uses, maybe? Are there other uses of the corn plant, like for biofuel, just for example? So look at this as what is your crop production perspective? You know, how would you produce the crop? What would you do? And then examine the differences between, you know, commercial production and, you know, backyard production, if that is applicable. We also want to look at the crop's growth. So how is it propagated? First of all, you know, is it propagated by seed, or do we grow transplants and plant those out in the field? And then look at the differences of the sexual propagation by seed and the asexual propagation, which is clonally, you know, by cutting or many other types of clonal propagation. And report to some extent on both, because there's going to be, you know, a little bit of both for pretty much every crop. In the sexual propagation, we're going to look at the breeding techniques. And you don't have to go into depth on this. 5 to 10 pages might sound like a lot, but when you really get into it and you answer all these questions, you know, you'll see that really there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of things that we can fill in. So what are the selection criteria? You know, what are they looking for in breeding the crops? Is it flavor or storability, color, maybe, nutrition, environment? Are the plants inbreeding or outbreeding? If you were to save seed from them, do they need isolation? How would you do that isolation? So we're going to kind of build on this throughout the semester, but I want you guys to get a good start on this project now. So on the seed properties, the sexual propagation, you know, what does it take for them to germinate? Are the seeds hybrid seeds or open pollinated seeds? Do they need a type of stratification or scarification for them to be viable? For the asexual propagation, how do you clone them? Cuttings, grafting, tissue culture? What are the methods and or the benefits of this clonal propagation to the production of that crop? Does it save time? Does it save money? Does it make sense to do? We're going to talk about the plant's nutrition. So what type of soil does that plant prefer? How do you prepare that soil to make sure that the crop can grow? Do we plow it, disc it, till it? You know, what do we do? You do a no-till system. What are some of the specific nutritional requirements? Of course, all plants share some of those requirements, but what are the particular needs? Like corn, for instance, is a heavy nitrogen feeder. So examine the needs of it, especially as it applies to your production area. And if it's an edible crop, you know, what are the human nutrition? How does that affect us? Why do we need to eat that plant? How is the crop produced? What are its production systems? Again, based on your perspective. Does it have a preferred aspect or microclimate? You know, maybe somebody chooses to grow ginseng or do their crop, you know, on ginseng. It's an alternative crop for sure. Where does it like to grow? For whatever reason, ginseng tends to prefer northeastern facing slopes. What is the growing season? What are the optimum temperatures? Days to maturity for different varieties. You can kind of look at that as the broad perspective as well as a little bit closer perspective. How do you seed them, plant them, and space them? Do they require mulching? Does mulching help? Is it economically viable? Do the plants require any kind of staking or trellising? Probably does if it's a vine crop. What are its water needs and irrigation needs? Are there specific season extension techniques for it? Like plasticulture or row cover? Can you get it out earlier? With sweet corn, some people actually start those in a greenhouse and put them out really early. That doesn't make any sense with field corn. What's the physiology of the plant? So what we're looking at here are problems with the plant associated with nutrient imbalances and deficiencies. And what are the signs and symptoms of those? So for corn, for instance, we start to get a purpling of the corn leaf. That's often a sign of potassium deficiencies. We start to get intraveinal chlorosis. We have iron or magnesium deficiencies, et cetera. You know, what does that look like in the plant? How do we solve it? What are the key pests and diseases of the plant? These are listed almost in every case. How do you monitor and scout for those pests? How do you prevent the pests? How do you control them? Again, you know, that could be a page in your report. You don't have to go into, you know, incredible detail on this. Just make sure that you're covering the basis of what are the key pests. On the harvest of it, you know, first the harvest indices. What is the indicator of when it is time to harvest it? You know, for sweet corn, we often wait until those the silks are starting to dry up on the plant. What are the harvesting techniques? Is it by hand? Is there a machinery that can harvest it? After it's harvested, how do we handle it? How do we store it before we get it to the market? On the sale of the plant, you know, how is it graded? You know, what does a grade A ear of sweet corn look like? How do we price it? And again, kind of looking at your perspective, wholesale or retail, how would you market that? Finally, kind of wrapping it up, what is the current and what are perhaps some of the future research considerations for the crop? You know, are they growing more for, you know, trying to genetically engineer it to produce more biofuel? Also, we want to have the very last page you reserved for your works cited. And I don't care what style you choose for that, just be consistent, whether it's APA, MLA, ABC, whatever. Just use a consistent works cited entry. And in your library resources, they often, when you're doing the search, you can actually download the citation while you're doing it. So technology makes it nice and easy. All right, so that's just the overview of our crop project in the class. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? I've got that module up, so go through there and just look through the module. There's a checklist on there. Sign up for your crop because that's going to be first come, first served. It can be anything that you are interested in. This is your chance to focus on something. Also, don't hesitate to talk to myself or perhaps even Tom, you know, about like economics of the crop or anything that you're having difficulty in finding information about it. Just talk to us. All right.
Hey, it's the big bugs.
Well, if you guys don't have any other questions or concerns, we'll go ahead and sign off. Be sure to do the quiz. It's open for both Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, and those are due Sunday night.
Okay. Bye, everybody. And see some of y'all in a few minutes.
Y'all have a great day.
Okay. And is Hunter here today again?
Hunter is not here, so no need to call us back.
Oh, so he's not going to be coming in, period? Okay.
Oh, he is, but I don't think he's coming today. So.
Oh, yeah, but that's what I meant today. Okay. Okay. Well, see you whatever that day is.
See y'all. Have a great weekend.